shame! That was true until the will was read.
The taste of fine wine became the taste of shame in a single moment of reckoning. In the grand dining room of Willow Creek Plantation, no one could have imagined that the crimson liquid staining the servant's white jacket would one day be worth more than all the land their feet stood upon. Have you ever discovered that someone you dismissed as insignificant held the power to change your entire future? That crushing realization when you understand too late that your cruelty toward others has sealed your own fate? The air hung heavy with the scent of magnolias and wealth in Georgia during the summer of 1857. Willow Creek Plantation stood as a monument to Southern prosperity, its white columns gleaming in the sunlight like polished ivory, its fields stretching toward the horizon in endless waves of cotton tended by hundreds of enslaved hands. The plantation house itself seemed to breathe privilege, its rooms filled with imported furniture, crystal chandeliers catching the light and scattering it across silk wallpaper. In this world of rigid hierarchy, everyone understood their place and the severe consequences of forgetting it. Master Edward Thornton ruled over this empire with a combination of aristocratic elegance and ruthless efficiency. At 65 years old, his once imposing frame had begun to bend slightly with age, but his steel blue eyes retained their piercing quality, and his voice commanded immediate attention whenever he spoke. Widowed for nearly a decade, he maintained the plantation with the help of his daughter Charlotte, a beautiful woman of 28 whose external grace concealed an internal hardness that often exceeded her father's. Charlotte moved through the house like a queen, her elaborate dresses rustling against polished floors, her hands never soiled by labor but always adorned with family heirlooms. Having been raised to believe in her inherent superiority, Charlotte treated the enslaved people around her with casual cruelty, viewing them as possessions rather than people, tools for her comfort rather than souls with their own dreams. Among the many enslaved people who maintained the Thornton lifestyle was Isaiah, a man of 32 who had been born on the plantation and served in the main house since childhood. Unlike many others, Isaiah could read and write, skills he had secretly acquired while dusting the library and listening to the tutor who came for Charlotte's education. His intelligence was evident in his perceptive gaze, though he had learned early to keep his eyes downcast in the presence of white people. Isaiah moved through the house with quiet efficiency, anticipating needs before they were voiced, becoming nearly invisible as all good servants were expected to be. What no one at Willow Creek knew, not even the other enslaved people, was that Isaiah shared a secret connection with Master Thornton, one that would eventually unravel the fabric of the plantation society. The story truly began during a lavish dinner party hosted by the Thorntons to celebrate Charlotte's engagement to James Harrington, the son of a neighboring plantation owner. The union would create one of the largest combined estates in the county, cementing the Thornton legacy for generations to come. The dining room glowed with candlelight, the air filled with the sounds of crystal clinking and affected laughter, as the elite of Georgia society congratulated themselves on their good fortune and bloodlines. Isaiah moved silently among the guests, refilling wine glasses and removing empty plates, his presence acknowledged only when service was required. Charlotte sat at the center of attention, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls, her blue silk dress imported from Paris specifically for this occasion. She accepted compliments with practiced modesty, her hand occasionally brushing against her fiancé's arm in a gesture of affection that seemed rehearsed rather than genuine. James Harrington played his part as the devoted husband-to-be, though those who looked closely might have noticed his eyes wandering to the young women serving at the table, a habit that promised future heartache but was generally overlooked among men of his station. As the evening progressed and the wine flowed freely, the conversation turned to business matters, specifically the expanding railroad that threatened to cut through several local properties. Master Thornton surprised the gathered company by announcing that he had decided to sell a portion of his land to the railroad company, a decision that would bring substantial profit, but ran counter to the unified opposition previously agreed upon by the local plantation owners. The announcement created an immediate tension in the room, with several guests exchanging concerned glances. Charlotte, caught unprepared by her father's declaration, felt her control over the evening slipping away. The attention of the room had shifted from her engagement to her father's business dealings, and the expression on her fiancé's face suggested disapproval. In that moment of social discomfort, Isaiah approached to refill her wine glass. Perhaps it was the timing, perhaps it was her need to reassert control, but as he leaned forward, Charlotte suddenly pulled back her arm in a sharp gesture of irritation, causing the wine to spill across the white tablecloth and onto Isaiah's jacket. The room fell silent as crimson spread across white linen and clothing. Charlotte's face contorted with anger not at her own clumsiness, but at Isaiah's perceived intrusion into her space. Rising slightly from her chair, she gestured dismissively toward the stain. "You clumsy nobody," she hissed loud enough for the entire table to hear, her voice cutting through the silence. "Clean this up immediately and remove yourself from my sight." Her words carried the weight of a lifetime of entitlement, each syllable a reminder of the unbridgeable gap between their stations. Isaiah's face remained impassive as he immediately began dabbing at the spill with a cloth, his eyes fixed on the task rather than meeting the many gazes now turned toward him. But something in the set of his shoulders, a momentary stillness before he moved to action, suggested that the insult had registered deeply. Only one person at the table noticed this subtle reaction, Master Thornton himself, who observed the interaction with an unreadable expression before smoothly steering the conversation back to safer topics. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Charlotte had retired to her room, Master Thornton summoned Isaiah to his study. The room smelled of tobacco and leather, its walls lined with books that represented knowledge forbidden to most enslaved people. Thornton sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his frame silhouetted against the dim lamplight. Isaiah stood before him, hands clasped behind his back, his stained jacket a visual reminder of the earlier humiliation. "I witnessed what happened at dinner," Thornton said, his voice neither kind nor cruel but matter-of-fact. "My daughter sometimes forgets herself." He paused, studying Isaiah's face for any reaction, but finding none. "You have served this household with distinction for many years, Isaiah. I have noticed your discretion and your intelligence, though you try to hide the latter." Isaiah remained silent, years of survival having taught him that responding to such observations could be dangerous. Thornton continued, opening a drawer in his desk and removing a small key. "There are changes coming to Willow Creek that few people know about, changes that will affect everyone who lives here. I find myself in need of someone I can trust with certain matters, someone who understands the value of patience and careful planning." What Master Thornton proposed that night was extraordinary. He wanted Isaiah to assist him in cataloging and organizing his personal papers and correspondence, work that would require literacy and discretion. The true motivation behind this request remained unclear to Isaiah, but the opportunity to access the master's private documents represented a potential source of valuable information, perhaps even leverage for freedom. With cautious questions and non-committal responses, Isaiah accepted the assignment, beginning a clandestine relationship that would continue for the next 3 years. During those years, Charlotte's treatment of Isaiah only worsened. Her marriage to James Harrington had quickly revealed itself to be less idyllic than anticipated. James spent more time hunting and visiting neighboring plantations than with his wife, and rumors of his indiscretions with enslaved women became increasingly difficult to ignore. Unable to confront her husband directly without admitting to the failure of her marriage, Charlotte displaced her frustration onto the household staff, with Isaiah becoming a particular target for her spite. Every small error or perceived slight became an opportunity for punishment or humiliation. She would call him to clean rooms multiple times, claiming to find dust in impossible corners. She would deliberately drop items and blame him for the breakage. Once, she even accused him of stealing a silver spoon that later appeared in her own dressing table drawer. The other house servants began avoiding working alongside Isaiah, fearing that Charlotte's displeasure might extend to them by association. Throughout this period, Master Thornton's health began to decline. A persistent cough developed into something more serious, and doctors began making regular visits to the plantation. As Thornton grew weaker, he relied increasingly on Isaiah for assistance with his private affairs. During late nights in the study, after the rest of the household had retired, Isaiah would read correspondence aloud, draft responses according to Thornton's dictation, and organize financial documents. Through these interactions, Isaiah began to piece together a surprising narrative. Master Thornton was secretly selling portions of the plantation's assets and investing in northern manufacturing businesses. Even more surprisingly, Isaiah discovered that Thornton had been corresponding with abolitionists in Boston, making inquiries about conditions for free black people in northern cities. The implications were staggering, suggesting that the plantation owner might be considering freeing his enslaved workers, a prospect that seemed impossible given his public stance as a staunch defender of slavery. Isaiah carefully kept this knowledge to himself, understanding that such information could be dangerous for everyone involved. As Master Thornton's illness progressed, Charlotte began taking a more active role in managing the plantation. She would often attempt to enter her father's study during his sessions with Isaiah, only to be firmly turned away by Thornton himself. These rejections fueled her resentment toward Isaiah, whom she increasingly viewed as having undue influence over her ailing father. She began spreading suspicions among the overseers that Isaiah was manipulating the master, perhaps even hastening his illness through some form of conjure. The tension came to a head during another dinner party, this one much smaller and hosted to discuss the distribution of crop yields with neighboring planters. Master Thornton, too weak to attend, remained in his bedroom upstairs. In his absence, Charlotte presided over the table, with Isaiah serving as he had always done. When one of the guests inquired about Thornton's health and his unusual business decisions of late, Charlotte's face darkened with anger and embarrassment. In a voice loud enough to ensure everyone would hear, she announced that her father's mind had been affected by his illness, and that certain servants had taken advantage of his weakened state. Her gaze fixed pointedly on Isaiah as she spoke. Reaching for her wineglass, she deliberately tipped it over, sending red liquid cascading across the table for the second time in 3 years. This time, however, the action was unmistakably intentional. "You," she said, addressing Isaiah directly as though they were alone in the room. "I know what you've been doing, spending hours alone with my father, filling his mind with your manipulation. You are nothing but a thief of influence, a nobody who forgets his place. Once my father passes, you will be the first one sold south, I promise you that." The threat of being sold to the Deep South plantations hung in the air like a physical presence. Everyone at the table understood the horror of such a fate, the brutal conditions on the sugar and rice plantations that often amounted to a death sentence. James Harrington, now visibly uncomfortable with his wife's display, attempted to change the subject, but Charlotte was not finished. "My father has become too lenient in his illness," she continued, "but I assure you all that once I inherit Willow Creek, proper order will be restored." She raised her glass in a mock toast toward Isaiah, her meaning clear. His days of relative privilege were numbered. That night, as Isaiah helped Master Thornton prepare for sleep, he found himself facing an impossible choice. Should he reveal what he had learned about Charlotte's plans for after her father's death, potentially endangering himself by admitting knowledge he shouldn't possess? Or should he remain silent and prepare for the worst once Thornton passed away? The old man seemed particularly frail that evening, his breathing labored and his hands trembling as he took his medicine. After a long silence during which Isaiah adjusted the bed covers and tended the fire, Thornton spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I heard about what happened at dinner tonight." His pale blue eyes, now clouded with illness, fixed on Isaiah's face. "My daughter has always feared what she cannot control, and she has never understood the true nature of worth." Isaiah remained still, uncertain how to respond. Thornton continued, "You have served me well these past years, Isaiah. More than served. You have shown intelligence and discretion beyond what I could have hoped for." The old man coughed violently, and Isaiah quickly helped him sip water to ease the spasm. When he could speak again, Thornton added, "There is a letter in my desk, 3rd drawer, sealed with my personal stamp. After I am gone, make sure that letter reaches Judge Williams in town directly, not through Charlotte or anyone else, directly to his hands. Do you understand?" Isaiah nodded, though his mind raced with questions he dared not ask. Thornton seemed to read his thoughts, a thin smile crossing his pale lips. "All will become clear in time," he said. "Just remember, patience has been your strength all these years. Let it serve you a little longer." 2 weeks later, Master Edward Thornton died peacefully in his sleep. The plantation was thrown into the formal rituals of mourning, the house draped in black crepe, visitors coming to pay respects to the family. Charlotte moved through these ceremonies with appropriate gravity, accepting condolences while already giving new orders to the overseers about changes to be implemented. True to her word, one of her first actions was to instruct the plantation manager to prepare papers for Isaiah's sale, citing insubordination as the cause. The day before the transaction was to be finalized, the reading of Thornton's will was scheduled at the county courthouse. As was customary, only family members and financial stakeholders were invited to attend. Isaiah, following Thornton's final instruction, had managed to deliver the sealed letter to Judge Williams personally, claiming to be running an errand for the household when questioned by suspicious overseers. What happened next would forever change the power dynamics of Willow Creek Plantation. As Charlotte and James Harrington sat in the courthouse, confidence radiating from their posture, Judge Williams entered with several documents and the sealed letter Isaiah had delivered. The formal reading proceeded as expected at first, with standard bequests to various relatives and business partners. Then came the surprise that would send shockwaves through the entire county. I want to pause this story for a moment to ask you directly. When was the last time you trusted someone and felt that stab in your chest, that silent warning that something wasn't right? I know you may never have shared this with anyone. It's that pain we keep, thinking no one will understand. But here in this space we're creating together, your experience matters. If you felt this silent betrayal, leave in the comments just the words, I recognize this feeling and see how many people share this invisible wound. Your comment could be the first step for someone to realize they're not alone on this journey. Let's continue the story now, but carrying this reflection with us. Judge Williams cleared his throat before reading from the sealed letter. "It is my final wish," he recited, "that it be known to all present that the man known as Isaiah, currently enslaved at Willow Creek Plantation, is in fact my natural son, born to an enslaved woman named Ruth 32 years ago." The gasps from those assembled echoed through the courtroom as Williams continued, "I hereby acknowledge Isaiah as my son and blood relation, and as such, I grant him his immediate freedom and bequeath to him ownership of 30% of Willow Creek Plantation, including the North Fields and corresponding structures." Charlotte's face drained of all color as the implications became clear. The man she had demeaned and threatened, the man she had called a nobody, was in fact her half-brother, and now a legal owner of nearly 1/3 of what she had assumed would be entirely hers. The document continued, outlining how Thornton had been secretly preparing for this moment for years, establishing legal precedents and financial arrangements that would be difficult to challenge. Furthermore, the will stipulated that another 30% of the plantation was to be divided among all currently enslaved people at Willow Creek, with specific instructions for their manumission and transition to paid labor should they choose to remain. The final 40% would go to Charlotte, with the stipulation that any attempt to contest the will would result in her portion being reduced to a mere 5%, with the remainder added to Isaiah's share. James Harrington, seeing his wife frozen in shock, immediately began questioning the legality of such arrangements. Judge Williams, who had apparently been consulted by Thornton years in advance, produced additional documentation confirming that all legal requirements had been meticulously addressed. The judge then asked if Isaiah was present, as there were documents requiring his signature. At this moment, the courthouse doors opened, and Isaiah entered. He had been waiting outside, having been informed by a court messenger that his presence would be required. He walked forward with dignity, his posture no longer bent in subservience, but straight with the knowledge of his true identity. Charlotte, seeing him approach, seemed to physically shrink in her seat, the memory of every harsh word and cruel action hanging between them. The days that followed were chaotic as news of Thornton's will spread throughout the county. Many neighboring plantation owners expressed outrage and concern that such a precedent could inspire similar revelations and demands elsewhere. Some even suggested legal challenges to overturn the will, but Judge Williams' thorough preparation and the clear documentation of Thornton's wishes made such efforts futile. For Isaiah, freedom came with both opportunity and danger. While legally protected by his new status and ownership, he faced threats and resentment from those who could not accept the new reality. He moved into a small house at the edge of what was now his property, employing several formerly enslaved people as free workers to manage his portion of the land. His first action as owner was to establish fair wages and humane working conditions, creating a model that stood in stark contrast to the surrounding plantations. Charlotte, unable to face the scandal and diminishment of her status, eventually convinced James to sell their remaining portion of Willow Creek and relocate to Europe. The sale price was significantly lower than the property's worth, as potential buyers were hesitant to invest in a plantation with such an unusual ownership arrangement. Before departing, Charlotte made one final visit to Isaiah's home, arriving unannounced and clearly uncomfortable. Their conversation was brief and strained. Charlotte, unable to directly acknowledge the blood relation between them, simply asked why their father had chosen this path. Isaiah considered the question carefully before answering. Perhaps he wanted to correct an injustice before meeting his maker, he suggested. Or perhaps he simply recognized that worth is not determined by the circumstances of one's birth, but by the content of one's character. As Charlotte turned to leave, Isaiah added one final thought. "The wine stains eventually came out of my jacket," he said quietly. "Some marks are more permanent than others." The reference to that fateful dinner party hung in the air between them, a reminder of how a single moment of cruelty had foreshadowed an unforeseen reversal of fortune. In the years that followed, Isaiah's portion of Willow Creek became known for its innovation and fair treatment of workers, attracting formerly enslaved people from surrounding areas seeking employment. The community-owned section transformed into a cooperative farm where former slaves worked together, sharing profits and building a new model of agricultural production. These changes came just as the nation began its descent into the Civil War, with Isaiah's experiment in free black land ownership becoming both a target for Confederate resentment and later a model for Reconstruction possibilities. The story of Willow Creek spread beyond Georgia, appearing in abolitionist publications as evidence that alternative futures were possible. Isaiah himself became an advocate for education and land ownership as pathways to true freedom. eventually establishing a school on his property where both children and adults could learn to read and write, skills that had once been forbidden to them by law. What this story reminds us is that betrayal works in many directions. While we often focus on those who betray trust from below, history is filled with examples of the greater betrayal from above, the denial of humanity, family bonds, and basic dignity to those deemed lesser by accidents of birth or circumstance. The ultimate betrayal at Willow Creek was not Isaiah's revelation of his true identity, but rather the system that had allowed a father to keep his son enslaved and a sister to treat her brother as property. In our own lives, we too may have experienced moments where our worth was questioned, where our humanity was secondary to our usefulness to others. Perhaps we have stood silent while wine was thrown, metaphorically or literally, on our dignity, or perhaps, uncomfortable though it may be to admit, we have been the ones who failed to see the humanity in others, who betrayed the trust of those with less power than ourselves. The legacy of these historical wounds continues to shape our world today, reminding us that healing requires both acknowledgement of past injustices and commitment to creating new systems based on recognition of our shared humanity. Like Isaiah, we must sometimes have the patience to wait for justice while working quietly toward change. And like Edward Thornton, we must recognize that meaningful amends require more than words, they require concrete actions that alter the distribution of power and opportunity. If these stories of courage and betrayal during the slavery era touch your heart as they touch mine, I invite you to join our community. By subscribing to the channel, you'll have access to carefully researched stories that reveal long-hidden truths about our past, helping to understand wounds that still echo in our society. It's not just about knowing history, but about honoring the memory of those who lived these realities. Click subscribe and let's journey together in discovery and reflection.